Hey y'all, happy Friday. So anyway, we are reading Nancy One's story. This is still in chapter 3.1, as you can see. So let's get started. Things began to get fairly physical between us. I had never entertained the idea of sex before, because it just wasn't done in our family. In those days, there was just a certain decorum in puritanical families. We were never even allowed to say the word pregnant. We had to say expecting. Okay. Everything I learned about sex was off the walls, in the A-wing bathroom. We would talk about it at lunchtime. Can you believe this is what they do? No, you're kidding. I mean, we were seniors in high school. How pathetic is that? I could tell that he knew a little bit more than I did, and as ridiculous as it sounds, I was learning from him. He had come out to visit me one evening, and we went for a walk. And he decided that he was going to be he decided that was going to be the evening he would have his way with me. And he did. I was scared. I just didn't know. I mean, the whole biology of it. He kept saying, "It's okay, it's okay. It's really hard to get pregnant. Don't worry." What did I know? I didn't see a lot of pregnant people, so I figured I guess it is really hard. Maybe you have to do this a lot to get pregnant. Later, I began to notice that there was something awry. I started getting sick in the morning. I knew something wasn't right. I got clothing for Christmas, and I knew that however badly those clothes fit me then, it was only going to get worse. I remember taking a particularly green and white dress that my father had bought up to my room. Sorry, there's some misspellings in here. I looked at myself in the mirror and thought, this is a joke. This is going right back to the store. I took it back, and later my father said, I'm not going to buy you kids' clothing anymore. Soon as I do, you hightail it right out back to the store and take it back. I stayed after school for a student council meeting, and I was sitting on top of a desk in a classroom, participating in this meeting, and I saw my mother's face through the door. She was a teacher at the elementary school in town, but I don't think she had ever set foot in the high school. I knew when I saw her face that she knew. She motioned for me, and I got my books. We walked down the hall, and she said, I need you to come with me. In the car, she turned to me and said, Are you really 4 months pregnant? I was like, me, pregnant? Of course not. What are you talking about? My sister had heard a rumor and told her. She reached over and sort of pulled my shirt up ever so slightly to touch my stomach and said, Are you? I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. She starts driving, and we wind up in the parking lot of our church. My father's car is parked there at 3:30 in the afternoon next to the minister's car. This is a party I don't want to be going to. The Reverend and my father were sitting in his living room. I had never been in the Reverend's home before. My mother sat down, and my father said, Okay, what's going on? I said, Pete's me, I have no idea what you people are up to. He dismissed that. He talked right over that and said, We've got a problem here. We're going to get this taken care of. We have to figure out what to do with the baby. That was the first time I ever heard the baby. And it was almost like a safety net for me. It wasn't my baby, it was the baby. I could separate myself from this problem, and I knew I wasn't going to have to make any decisions about it because it wasn't mine. I continued to deny it up and down. I don't know what you're talking about. There's no baby. My mother finally said, Okay, if it's not true, would you at least do us a favor and go to the doctor tonight, just to get it confirmed? I said, Sure. There's nothing to confirm. My father, my mother, and I drive to the doctor. He meets us there at 8 at night. It's this big, huge Victorian home that I'm terrified to be in. I'd never met this guy in my life. Never had any kind of exam at all, except for a dentist appointment. He takes me up to the examining room, has me take off all of my clothes, and put on a Johnny. He does an internal exam and says, Okay, you can put your clothes on now. I consider leaving through the back door in the middle of the winter to go to another planet. All I knew is I did not want to go back into that room where my parents were waiting. We went home and there was some tears. And I remember my mother saying those classic words, "Why? And how could you?" Until finally, out of emotional exhaustion, we all went to bed. Arrangements were made for me to be sent to this home. It was presented as an option at the time. "It would be more comfortable for you. If you'd like to do that, we'll help you." The night before I was scheduled to leave, my mother was starting to feel the effects of the impending separation, and I had the very first, possibly the only, honest conversation I ever had with her. I felt safe enough. So sorry about that interruption. Continuing on. The night before I was scheduled to leave, my mother was starting to feel the effects of the impending separation. And I had the very first, possibly the only, honest conversation I ever had with her. I felt safe enough, as we do when we're feeling close, to ask her this question. How do they get rid of the mark when they take the baby out? I'd seen people in bathing suits, and I could never tell if they had children. She stood there 3 feet from me with a look of horror on her face and said, "My God, Nancy, that baby comes out the same way it went in." I said, "You've got to be kidding me." She said, "No." Yeah, so unless there's, okay, not to say that there aren't multiple ways of birth, or there's 2 ways the baby can essentially come out. C-section or vagina. I had an emergency I can't even speak. A C-section. Oh my God, it was a nightmare of a birth. But yeah, that back then, a C-section was not common unless it was an emergency. So, okay, continuing on. I mean, it's borderline child abuse not to share this kind of information. How can anyone think that we will just absorb it naturally, or that it's our responsibility as children to figure it out? It just mystifies me. I had no idea. I mean, we had never had pets. I don't live on a farm. We had a very puritanical beaver cleaver lifestyle. And it just wasn't anything that was ever discussed. I mean, as amazing as it sounds, I was 16 and pregnant, and I did not know how babies were born. It's pathetic, but it's true. At the maternity home, there was a roster on a bulletin board near the stairway that indicated people's chores. The chores rotated. They were minor, like cleaning the bathrooms, running a vacuum cleaner, helping out in the kitchen, setting the table, that kind of stuff. As new girls came in, their names went to the bottom. So over time, you were there, you would watch your name continue to move up that list. That was the one indicator of how close you were. When a girl left, we would never see her again. A few girls, revolutionary girls, talked about keeping their babies, but we knew they were crazy. We knew no one was allowed to keep their baby. When I went into labor, someone from the home drove me to the hospital. She left the car running, went into the emergency room, and said, "I've got a girl from the home here." And she turned around and left. They put me in a room, and I lay on a bed holding onto the bars above my head, enduring contractions. In silence. I was afraid to make any noise. I lay there almost all night. It got worse and worse, and I held on for dear life. Finally, someone came by and said, "What are you doing in here?" They took me into the delivery room. It was a huge room with a lot of people milling about. Here I am in the stirrups, and all these young doctors are kind of walking by chit-chatting like they're at a baseball game. I remember being so humiliated. Finally, a doctor comes in. He starts saying, "Push," and I'm thinking, push what? I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't know how to help. I couldn't help. I had no control over my body at that point. He started yelling, "Who gave this girl so many drugs?" Then 2 other people started pushing on my stomach, and I could see it, that round light above my head, the reflection of what was happening. My child was being born. And this guy saw that I could see and move the light, and he tipped it away once he realized I could actually see the event that was mine. He took that away from me. Every day, I asked if I could see my baby, and every day they said, yes, we'll come and get you and take you to the nursery. But they never did. Then the day I was being released, someone took me upstairs and wheeled me in front of the nursery window. She pointed to the one that was mine and said, that's him. I asked if I could hold him, and she said no. I just looked through a piece of plexiglass. She stepped back from the wheelchair and said, are you done? So not only is that harmful to the birth mother, that's extremely harmful to the child. As we've mentioned, the 3 months after a child's birth is considered the 4th trimester, and babies need to bond. So when you do this, even for NICU babies, I know it's complicated with NICU because for medical reasons, right? But to not have the baby bond with their biological parent is harmful. Now, that's not to say when you're adopted, you don't try to bond for the most part with your adoptive parents. They think that there's this whole blank slate and the baby's gonna be well adjusted. The thing is that as babies, we're with a stranger. And our bodies react to that. So it's just harmful. Anyway, continuing on. After I sort of fell into my old ways and started seeing my friends again, but I wasn't the same anymore. I mean, you just can't be the same after the experience of becoming a mother. I knew that my son was going to be part of my life again one day. I knew that my son was going to be part of my life again one day. I never let go of that from the very beginning. I remember writing to the agency because I had some things I was making for him that I wanted to send. I got a note back saying, don't send anything else. I remember thinking, oh, over my dead body, are they going to tell me this is done? When he was about 2, I met my husband. I remember it was one of the first things I told him. I have a 2-year-old son that's going to be part of my life someday. I figured, I'm a package deal now. There was no way to undo that. In the late 80s, I was reading the paper one day, and there was a little block ad, which I still have, that said Adoption Issues Group meeting at the library. I closed the paper, and then I opened again, and I thought, adoption issues? I think I have an adoption issue. So I cut it out and put it on the bulletin board in the kitchen. I found myself ruminating over it constantly. I remember sitting at the table one night, and my husband was looking at me, and he said, what are you thinking about? And I said, nothing. He said, you're going to that meeting, aren't you? I said, yeah, I'm going to that meeting. I had to say it many times over the next few weeks in order to actually get my strength up to go. When I walked in, someone approached me and said, hi, I'm Barbara. I'm a birth mother. I thought, she just said that in front of everybody in this room with a smile on her face. And as those meetings progressed over October, November, and December, all the tears that had never finally came. I decided that if I could go to the meetings for a year without crying, then I could be ready to pursue an active search. In January 1989, which was the year he turned 21, I was ready to search. I finally got the nerve to call the agency, and the director said, I really can't tell you anything over the phone. If you have any questions, they have to be done in writing. I'm thinking, oh, that's just great. I could barely say the words. Now you're asking me to write them? I couldn't. Then one summer evening, my husband said, why don't we just sit outside? You tell me what you want to say, and I'll write the letter. Okay, so first of all, her husband is extremely supportive. That is amazing. As should be. Husbands should be supportive. But, and that's exactly how we need adoptive parents to be. So if you're an adoptive parent listening, help your child. Encourage the search if they're not connected with their family. Encourage meetings. Encourage talking about them. These women are still their birth mothers. There are mothers, okay? You can't take that away. Whew, sorry, ranting here. Where was I? It seemed much easier that way. On Monday morning, I walked up to the granite steps of the old post office and put that letter down on the counter, shaking. On Wednesday, my husband called me at work crying. I've only heard him cry once, when his father died. He had done something he'd never done before, and he has never done since. He opened mail that had my name on it. The letter said, "Dear Nancy, I got your letter and I've read it, and nowhere in it did you say you'd like to meet your son. If that's something you're interested in, I'd like you to call me because I opened your file and there's a letter from your son in there." Okay, I'm sorry, I'm about to cry. Agencies don't usually give out this information. And birth mothers or fathers and children often search for one another. So for people to say that we're unwanted, which is a comment I got the other day, that, why search for your birth family? There's so many reasons, but we were meant to know each other. We were meant to be in each other's lives. So, yeah. All right, anyway. He read this letter to me, and the only word I could use, apologies, I was interrupted by my little love. He wanted applesauce. He loves applesauce. Anywho, we are continuing on with this chapter. We only have a few more pages left. All right, so let's go. Where were we? He read the letter to me, and the only word I can use to describe it was, I was paralyzed, absolutely paralyzed, at the thought that he had tried to make contact and no one told me. His letter had said, if you're interested in talking to me, give me a call. The thought that my son might even entertain the idea that I hadn't held him close to my heart for 20 years. I hung up from the call with my husband, picked up the phone, and called the guy at the agency. I said, I just got your letter. He said, I'm not sure if you know what you want to do. You might need some time to think about it. I said, I don't need any one more effing minute. Okay? He said, don't get mad at me. I wasn't even there then. I've only been here 13 years. The phone rang at work and someone said, it's for you. It's a young man. I took it to the back room. He said, hi. The man at the agency gave me your phone number, and I asked him the question, if I'd ever... Wait, what? I asked every single night, 365 days a year for 21 years. Where are you? I looked up at the stars at night and think, we're under the same sky, and it was the one thing that made me feel close to him. I knew that he was looking at the same stars. I didn't know where he was. He could have been in Germany if he was in the service. I was prepared for him to be anywhere in the world. When I said, where are you? He says, I'm in my bedroom. I said, okay, where's your bedroom? As it turns out, he was right across the river from me. We know a lot of the same people. Our paths had crossed many times. We ate at the same restaurants. I worked in the theater department of a college where he was taking classes. Oh my God. She probably seen her son so many times wondering, is that my child? Is that my child? Is that my child? Wow. For those with closed adoptions, right, like hers was, and I'm not speaking from the birth parent perspective, I'm thinking from the adoptee perspective. The amount of times wondering where your birth parent is beyond amazing. Now, that being said, I had an open adoption. I knew where my birth mother was for the most part. I think I know where, I think she just moved. I could be wrong. I didn't know where my birth father was until fairly recently, and even now, like, I don't know what he's doing. It's complex. But I always wondered, is he ever going to show up? So, yeah, that's, wow. All right. I wound up seeing a psychiatrist for about a year to deal with the grief, which I hadn't fully dealt with. It was never a good idea to delay that process. Agree, if you're a birth parent listening, it is so important to find therapy, adoption-informed therapy, not just for adoptees, not just for adoptive parents, which also should go for infertility trauma if you are infertile, but also for the birth parents, okay? And there's nothing wrong with therapy if you're neither, or if you're not in the triad. All right. Oh, God. It was a difficult year for me, juggling family, a job, our relationship, and dealing with my past at the same time. My son lived near me for about 8 years and then moved to New York City. We started a small business together so we could work together, and we became very close during that time. Losing him had such a profound influence on me. My siblings all had fancy degrees and very focused careers, and they drew from that in order to define who they were. This is what I had. This is what influenced most of my life decisions, the development of my family, where I lived. I would never have moved out of a state because this is the last place I saw him. It affected the choice of my husband, and to someone who was accepting immediately and almost passive about it. It affected my drive in terms of politics, and I think, most of all, my sense of feminism. People say to me, "Oh, well, it's not that way anymore." I say, it's still that way for a lot of us. A lot of my sisters are still suffering in silence. So very true. And the more I read about the psychological effect that the stress has on your life, I'm not all convinced that there isn't a small connection between illness and trauma, which there is proof. There's lots of proof. Anyway, I've known some birth mothers who died when they were 50 years old from cancer of one kind or another. Okay, I don't know about the cancer part, but having autoimmune disease is very much linked with trauma and stress. Just letting you guys know that. Okay, trauma is not a mystery. It really attaches itself to you in a way that's very hard to undo. It's hard to convince others about the depth of it. A few years after I was married, I became pregnant and I had an abortion. It was not a wonderful experience. But every time I hear stories or articles or essays about the recurring trauma of abortion, I want to say, you don't have a clue. I've experienced both. And I'd have an abortion any day of the week before I would ever have another adoption. Or lose a kid in the woods, which is basically what it is. Your child is out there somewhere. You just don't know where. It was bad enough as a mother to know he might need you, but to complicate that they make a law that says if he does need you, we're not going to tell him where you are. All right, so pausing there, a lot of adoptees, including myself, often say we would have rather been aborted than adopted. Now, that's not to say that we couldn't have had amazing, loving adoptive parents. The rarity of that is 1%. Now, if you've listened to my story for a while, I consider myself in that 1%. That being said, the trauma of losing your parent is so significant, right? And I am a pro-choice adoptee. Don't get me wrong, I really am. But it has such an effect not only on the birth mother, the siblings, but also on the child and the adoptive parents. Not that I care what they think, but they don't care about adoptees. We're at such a high rate of unaliving, whether it's from murder or our own hand, or from alcoholism or drugs. There's just so much, and it's so sad that they ignore the statistics. And it's mostly the government, as she said, And as we're dealing with this now in 2023, they're pushing, adoption is the answer, and we're trying to explain it never was the answer. Even when abortion was illegal, right? You're just creating back, abortions that are harmful, that are going to end up killing women. And it's horrible. It's really just horrible. Anyway, it overshadows my life. People can't believe it has had such an influence, or they don't believe that it is relevant anymore because I know my son now. But that little wet ink across a piece of paper made me not a mother in the eyes of society. That's how we see it as well, that we are legally severed from our biological family as adoptees. That's all it took, was a stroke of a pen. They felt they could erase it, but we just aren't made that way. It's unnatural to be separated from your child that way. And if it happens when you're 14, 15, 16 years old, and it's your first experience of motherhood, it makes you a little crazy. Sometimes I wonder how many of us survived it and are as successful as we are in our interpersonal relationships. Not that I consider myself to be completely successful. I've sequestered myself out here in the woods for most of my life, to be away from people. I've changed my personality. I feel like I was in a car accident. You know how sometimes when people have had trauma, have a head trauma, their personality changes? Well, it changed my personality. I didn't really care if I have the popular view. I suffered this alone for 21 years, so everyone around me would be comfortable. It's still happening today. Don't talk about it because it makes us uncomfortable. And I didn't. So, yeah, still happening, and adoptees often feel this way as well around our adoptive parents. And we have to deal with this our entire lives, not just with the adoptive parents, but with society, where if we talk about the trauma or we talk out about how harmful it is, we're called ungrateful or unwanted or hateful. That's some of the comments I've gotten recently on my TikTok, or, commenting on TikToks. And it's like they just want to see adoption as this rainbow and beauty and all this, but they ignore all the harm. They can recognize the harm when it's foster care, often, not all the time. They can recognize the harm if a parent dies, right? Or a war happens sometimes. Ukraine war is a little complicated. There are, of course, people that are like, well, let's adopt the babies. And yet it's against the Geneva Convention, right? We're going to talk about that at some point. But when it comes to adoption, they don't care. They don't care how we feel as adoptees. They don't care how birth mothers feel, or birth fathers even. They just don't care. They want to shut us up and be silent and suffer. Sorry, I'm getting very animated right now. I think if anything good came from my pain, it has been to encourage other women in my situation to understand that they have as much a right to put their opinion out there as I do. I tell them their story is as important as the next person's story. They all have to be heard. For 21 years, I wasn't allowed to speak about it, but I have my own voice now. So that's very true. If you are a birth mother and you are willing to tell your story, go ahead and do so. Whether it's here and you want to comment, or you want to make your own videos, or you want to talk about it on your social media, whether that's Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, whatever it may be. We are here, okay? We are here. Now, I'm not on Twitter personally. Not to say I don't have a Twitter. I just don't use it. I don't like Twitter. But if you're on my TikTok, go ahead. I just started an Instagram, so if you want to comment there, go ahead. We are here. As adoptees and birth mothers, we are in this together to change the way things are happening, because it is so wrong. Anyway, I will see you guys next Monday if you're following along as I'm doing my readings. If you're here later, you guys can check out that next video, and I'll see you guys real soon. Bye.